Greetings, fellow time travelers, and welcome back to Vibing History. Tonight, we journey almost 4,200 years into the past, to an era when an invisible adversary swept across continents, shattering mighty empires and reshaping the very course of human civilization. We're about to uncover a climatic event so profound, it forever altered the destiny of millions. So, settle in, perhaps grab a warm drink, and prepare to immerse yourselves in the untold story of the 4.2 kilo-year event. If this journey into ancient mysteries captivates you, please remember to like, comment, and share this episode. It truly helps us keep these stories alive. Now, let us begin. Tonight, we're going to journey back in time, over 4 millennia ago, to a period that reshaped the ancient world in ways that are almost unfathomable to us today. Imagine a global shift, a relentless force of nature, so profound that it brought mighty empires to their knees, scattered entire populations, and etched itself into the very fabric of human civilization. We're talking about the 4.2 kilo-year event, a long-term drought, a climate cataclysm that truly defines the beginning of our current geological age, the Megalayan. Now, when we speak of 2200 BC, we're delving into a world teeming with nascent complexities. Picture the Fertile Crescent, the vibrant banks of the Nile, the bustling cities of the Indus Valley. These were the cradles of civilization, places where humanity was taking its first grand, organized steps. But around this time, something began to change. The very air seemed to thicken with a growing unease, a subtle but relentless tightening of nature's grip. This wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic meteor strike, no. This was a slow, agonizing suffocation, a drying up of the very lifeblood that sustained these ancient societies. For nearly an entire century, roughly from 2200 BC onwards, the world experienced what can only be described as an unprecedented period of aridification. It was a drought unlike any other in the Holocene epoch, the geological age we still inhabit. And it's not just a theory, it's a global narrative recorded in the very earth beneath our feet, in ancient lakebeds, ice cores, and speleothems, those delicate cave formations that act as nature's meticulous historians. Now, before we delve into the devastating consequences, let's explore what might have triggered such an immense and prolonged climatic shift. Scientists, with their incredible tools and insights, have pieced together a fascinating, albeit complex, puzzle. One leading hypothesis points to a significant weakening of the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC. Think of the AMOC as a giant conveyor belt of ocean currents, tirelessly transporting heat and nutrients across the globe. When this massive system falters, it throws the entire planet's climate out of whack, disrupting global ocean currents and generating widespread precipitation and temperature anomalies. Imagine this: the Intertropical Convergence Zone, or ITCZ, that crucial belt of low pressure near the equator where moist air rises and creates abundant rainfall, abruptly shifted southward. For regions dependent on its annual blessing, this was a death knell. Less rain meant parched lands, dwindling rivers, and dying crops. And to add another layer of complexity, evidence suggests an increase in the variability of the El Niño Southern Oscillation, or ENSO. We know ENSO today as a powerful driver of global weather patterns, and its amplified fluctuations thousands of years ago would have only exacerbated the already dire climatic conditions. Some even proposed explosive volcanism in Iceland as a potential culprit. Picture massive eruptions spewing ash and gases into the atmosphere, potentially blocking sunlight and altering global temperatures. However, the relatively low sulfur content of Icelandic volcanoes has led many studies to suggest their impact on global climate would have been negligible in comparison to the sheer scale of the drought. The scientific consensus leans heavily towards the oceanic and atmospheric forces at play. The evidence for this profound aridification event is widespread and compelling, painting a mosaic of despair across vast swathes of the ancient world. From North Africa to the Middle East, the Red Sea to the Arabian Peninsula, the Indian subcontinent to mid-continental North America, the fingerprints of intense aridity are clearly visible in the geological record. Glaciers in the mountain ranges of Western Canada and even in Iceland experienced significant advances around this time, hinting at regional cooling alongside the widespread drying. Further proof comes from an Italian cave flowstone, the majestic Kilimanjaro ice sheet, and the ancient ice of the Andean glaciers. Each provides a unique, frozen snapshot of a world undergoing dramatic transformation. Interestingly, the onset of aridification in Mesopotamia around 2100 BC coincided with a distinct cooling event in the North Atlantic, known as Bond Event 3. This connection suggests a tightly interwoven global climate system, where shifts in one region could cascade into devastating consequences far away. Now, I must pause here to acknowledge a healthy debate within the scientific community. While the evidence for a widespread aridification event is robust, its global synchronicity and precise timeline are still subjects of ongoing discussion. Some scientists argue that the 4.2 Ka event was not a perfectly uniform global drought, but rather a series of regionally distinct, though interconnected climatic shifts. Paleoclimatologists like Jessica Tierney have raised valid points about the potential for researchers to sometimes lump together evidence of other droughts and wet periods, creating a seemingly clearer, but perhaps oversimplified, picture. This nuanced perspective doesn't diminish the severity of the event, but rather emphasizes the spatial complexity of its origins and effects. It reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming evidence, the past rarely offers us simple, clean answers. Despite these academic discussions, the International Commission on Stratigraphy, in 2018, recognized the profound impact of this period by formally dividing the Holocene epoch into 3 periods. The late Holocene, from around 2250 BC onwards, was officially designated as the Megalayan stage or age, with a speleothem from Mamluk Cave in India serving as its boundary stratotype, and an ice core from Mount Logan in Canada as a global auxiliary stratotype. This formal recognition by leading scientific bodies underscores the sheer magnitude of the 4.2 Ka event and its enduring legacy on Earth's climate history. So, how did this massive climatic upheaval manifest itself across different regions? Let's take a closer look at the cascading effects, starting with Europe. In the British Isles, for instance, the record is less definitive, showing only a brief isotopic excursion in some cave speleothems. The precise manner in which this climatic event impacted Ireland and Great Britain remains somewhat ambiguous. However, we do see some intriguing shifts, such as a decline in the abundance of the yew tree in eastern England, suggesting environmental stress. Moving to Central Europe, sediment analysis from Lake Spore in Poland reveals that winters became noticeably colder between 4250 and 4000 years before present. This cooling likely triggered a process called podzolization, the generation of a specific boreal forest soil type, around 4200 BP. Interestingly, summer temperatures in this region remained relatively constant, and humidity levels weren't significantly affected by the 4.2 Ka event. This tells us that the impact wasn't uniform, but rather a complex tapestry of localized changes. The Iberian Peninsula offers an even more intricate picture. While the overall climate between 2800 and 1100 BC was generally stable and relatively humid, a closer look at precipitation reconstructions reveals 2 rapid, pronounced dry phases, one from 2350 to 2200 BC and another from 2100 to 2000 BC. These dry spells were, surprisingly, followed by shifts towards wetter conditions, suggesting a more oscillating pattern of climate change compared to other regions. The social and archaeological implications on the Iberian Peninsula are particularly striking. We see a slight decrease in settlement activity from 2500 BC, followed by a significant decline between 2300 and 2100 BC. In regions like the southeast, and especially the Evora region, there was a documented collapse of settlement activity, with population levels remaining low for centuries afterward. This suggests a direct correlation between the climatic shifts and human settlement patterns. Yet, amidst this decline, some remarkable adaptations emerged. In southeastern Spain, new archaeological cultures began to flourish. One of these is associated with the construction of motillas-type settlements. These unique structures, appearing after 2200 BC, are believed to be a direct consequence of the severe aridification. According to recent paleohydrogeological research, these motillas may represent the oldest and most ancient system of groundwater collection on the Iberian Peninsula. Their construction was likely a desperate, yet ingenious, response to the prolonged, harsh drought and other climatic perturbations brought by the 4.2 Ka event. It's a testament to human ingenuity in the face of environmental adversity, literally digging deep to survive. Another fascinating development on the Iberian Peninsula was the rise of the El Arger phenomenon. While initially experiencing a slight collapse, this culture soon stabilized and wasn't negatively affected by the Second Dry Period. It's conceivable, though not perfectly clear, that the decreasing settlements in the west and increasing settlement activities in the east were interconnected, reflecting regional migrations and adaptations to changing environmental conditions. Moving to the Italian peninsula, we find further evidence of localized climatic shifts. In the Gulf of Genoa, the mean annual temperature dropped, winters became drier, and summers became wetter and cooler. This phenomenon was likely caused by a southward retreat of the ITCZ in summer, which weakened high pressure and reduced ocean warming over the western Mediterranean, leading to retarded evaporation rates in the autumn and early winter. Paradoxically, the 4.2 Ka event appears to have wetted the climate in the Alps, with increased precipitation in Lake Petit. However, southern Italy, in stark contrast, experienced intense aridification, leading to a major decline in forests. These regional variations highlight the complex and often counterintuitive ways in which global climate events can manifest locally. Now, let's turn our gaze to North Africa, a region inherently dependent on reliable water sources. At the site of Sidi Ali in the Middle Atlas, isotopic values surprisingly indicate not a dry spell, but rather a centennial-scale period of cooler and more humid climate. This again shows the patchwork nature of the event. However, for ancient Egypt, the consequences were far more devastating. Around 2150 BC, Egypt was struck by a series of exceptionally low Nile floods. The Nile, as you know, was the lifeblood of Egyptian civilization. Its annual inundation was not just a blessing, but a fundamental pillar of their agricultural economy and their very worldview. Prolonged low floods would have meant widespread crop failure, famine, and social unrest, all of which likely played a significant role in the collapse of the centralized government of the Old Kingdom. We'll delve deeper into the fall of the Old Kingdom in our next segment, but suffice it to say, the Nile's betrayal during this period was a mortal blow. The Middle East also bore the brunt of this climate cataclysm. The South-Central Levant experienced what has been termed a W-shaped event, 2 phases of intense, dry climate, punctuated by a brief wet interval. This fluctuating pattern would have been incredibly challenging for agricultural societies, offering false hope only to snatch it away again. In Mesopotamia, enhanced dust flux, mirroring intense aridity, is recorded from 4260 to 3970 years before present. The aridification here may have been directly linked to the cooler sea surface temperatures in the North Atlantic, the aforementioned Bond Event 3. Modern instrumental records show a clear correlation. Large reductions in Mesopotamian water supply often occur when subpolar Northwest Atlantic sea surface temperatures are anomalously cool. This is because the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the twin lifelines of Mesopotamia, are fed by elevation-induced capture of winter Mediterranean rainfall. A cooler North Atlantic could disrupt this delicate system, choking off the life-giving rivers. And it was here, in Mesopotamia, that one of the ancient world's most powerful empires met its tragic end, the Akkadian Empire. Established around 2300 BC, it was the second civilization to unify independent societies into a single state, following ancient Egypt. For generations, it was believed that the collapse of this formidable state was profoundly influenced by this widespread, centuries-long drought. Archaeological evidence supports this grim narrative, documenting widespread abandonment of the agricultural plains of northern Mesopotamia and a dramatic influx of refugees into the southern regions around 2170 BC. Imagine hundreds of thousands of people, desperate and starving, fleeing their parched lands, overwhelming the resources of the south. This massive displacement would have undoubtedly weakened the Akkadian state, leaving it vulnerable. To stem the tide of nomadic incursions from the desperate displaced populations, a massive 180-kilometer-long wall, famously known as the Repeller of the Amorites, was built across central Mesopotamia. But even such monumental efforts proved futile. Around 2150 BC, the Gutian people, fierce inhabitants of the Zagros Mountains, seized their opportunity. They defeated the demoralized Akkadian army, took Akkad, and by 2115 BC, the once mighty empire lay in ruins. Estimates suggest anywhere from 126,000 to over 300,000 people were displaced from the zones of uncertainty, a human tragedy of immense scale. It would take nearly 3 centuries, until around 1900 BC, for smaller sedentary populations to begin resettling the northern plains. The effects of the 4.2 Ka event rippled across the Persian Gulf region as well. Here, we see a sudden and dramatic change in settlement patterns, pottery styles, and even tomb construction. The 22nd century BC drought marks the end of the al-Nar culture and the transition to the Wadi Suk culture. Studies of fossil corals in Oman provide compelling evidence that prolonged winter shamal seasons, around 2200 BC, led to the salinization of irrigated fields. This made farming impossible, drastically reducing crop production, triggering widespread famine, and ultimately contributing to the collapse of civilizations in the region. Now, let's journey further east to South and Central Asia. Here, the climatic shifts were equally profound. The Siberian high, a massive, cold anticyclonic air mass, increased in both area and magnitude. This powerful high-pressure system acted like a barrier, blocking moisture-carrying westerly winds and causing intense aridity across Central Asia. On the Indian subcontinent, both the Indian summer monsoon and the Indian winter monsoon declined significantly in strength, leading to highly arid conditions in northwestern South Asia. The monsoon, much like the Nile in Egypt, was the lifeblood of the great Indus Valley civilization. Its weakening is clearly evident in geological record from lakes like Rara, showing low Mn/T and Mn/Fe values. The area around Ponkingtung Tso Lake in Arunachal Pradesh experienced cold and dry conditions, dominated by subalpine vegetation. While some records suggest a prolonged, multi-centennial dry period, others indicate that the 4.2 Ka event was more a series of intense, multi-decadal droughts. Regardless of the precise duration, the impact was devastating. The second millennium BC was a time of immense ecological upheaval across the Eurasian steppes and South Asia. On the steppes, the vegetation changed dramatically, forcing human populations to adopt higher mobility and transition to nomadic cattle breeding. Water scarcity wasn't just a hardship, it was a societal transformer. For the magnificent Indus Valley civilization, this period marked its agonizing demise. Its urban centers, once symbols of advanced planning and prosperity, were gradually abandoned, replaced by disparate local cultures. This collapse, many scholars now believe, was fundamentally driven by the very climate change that devastated neighboring regions to the west. The Ghaggar-Hakra river system, a crucial artery of the Indus, was primarily rain-fed, its water supply entirely dependent on the monsoons. As the climate grew significantly cooler and drier from around 1800 BC, linked to the general weakening of the monsoon, aridity increased. The Gagarhakra River began to retract its reach, shrinking towards the foothills of the Himalayas. This led to erratic and less extensive floods, rendering inundation agriculture, the foundation of their prosperity, unsustainable. The dwindling water supply was enough to cause the civilization's demise and scatter its population eastward, searching for new, more hospitable lands. The story of their struggle and dispersal is a powerful testament to the fragility of even the most sophisticated societies when faced with relentless environmental collapse. Continuing our eastward trajectory, the 4.2 Ka event had a profound impact on East Asia. It resulted in an enormous reduction in the strength of the East Asian summer monsoon, or ESM. This weakening has been linked to the reduction in the strength of the AMOC in the Atlantic. The cooling of North Atlantic waters once again caused a ripple effect, leading to a retardation of the ESM's northward movements and diminished rainfall on its northern margin. This created a stark humidity gradient between northern and southern China. Northeastern China was severely affected, with proxy records from Hulun Lake in Inner Mongolia revealing a major dry event from 4210 to 3840 years before present. Records from Wudali Crater Lake indicate a sharp decline in evergreen broadleaf forests. In Yonglu Cave in Hubei, isotopic values confirm increased aridity, showing a gradual onset but a sudden, dramatic end to the event. Interestingly, in the Luoyang Basin, the impact was less severe, with precipitation being low but not extremely so, and in central China, precipitation actually increased. These variations are crucial to understanding the nuanced impact of such a widespread event. The Korean Peninsula also experienced significant aridification, evident in a large decline in arboreal pollen percentages. Yet, on Jeju Island, the climate remained humid, as evidenced by the presence of specific planktonic species in its wetlands. This localized resilience in some areas amidst widespread drying is a fascinating anomaly. Further northeast, in Japan, the Sanoyama site, a significant Jaman culture settlement, began to decline during this period. The once growing population gradually dwindled, perhaps due to environmental stresses. Ribon Island experienced an abrupt and intense cooling around 4,130 BP, also believed to be associated with the 4.2 Ka event. And what about the burgeoning Chinese civilizations of time? The drought may have played a significant role, or at least partially contributed, to the collapse of Neolithic cultures around central China in the late 3rd millennium BC. In the Ishu River Basin, the flourishing Longshan culture was hit by a cooling that severely reduced rice output, leading to a substantial decrease in population and fewer archaeological sites. Around 2000 BC, the Longshan was displaced by the Yueshur culture, which possessed fewer and less sophisticated artifacts, suggesting a societal setback. The Liangzhu civilization in the lower reaches of the Yangtze River also declined during this same period, as did the Dankou culture. However, the Longshan culture of the less affected Luoyang Basin continued to thrive, and the 4.2 Ka event seems to have had no discernible impact on the spread of millet cultivation in the region. This highlights that while the overall impact was severe, some societies, either through resilience, geographical luck, or successful adaptation, managed to navigate the crisis more effectively than others. Finally, a quick glance at Southeast Asia and Southern Africa. In Borneo, the 4.2 Ka event substantially reduced ENSO variability, a significant climatic shift recorded in stalagmite isotopic values. This reduction was comparable only to an even earlier and more intense event, the 8.2 kilo-year event. In southern Africa, specifically northeastern Namibia, stalagmites indicate a paradoxically wetter period, thanks to the southward shift of the ITCZ, with this humidification event occurring in 2 distinct pulses. And in the Mascarenes, on Rodriguez Island, no signal of the 4.2 Ka event has been found, further emphasizing the patchy, localized nature of its manifestations. The 4.2 kilo-year event serves as a stark reminder of humanity's vulnerability to climate change, even for societies that had achieved remarkable levels of organization and complexity. It wasn't a single, uniform disaster, but a prolonged period of environmental stress that manifested in diverse ways across the globe, pushing ancient civilizations to their breaking points. The echoes of this ancient cataclysm still resonate today, offering invaluable lessons about resilience, adaptation, and the interconnectedness of our planet. In our next segment, we will delve deeper into the fall of the Old Kingdom of Egypt, exploring how the vanishing Nile truly shattered the pharaoh's scepter and plunged a once mighty empire into chaos. Welcome back, my friends, to a journey through the whispers of the past, a journey that often unearths not only grand empires and heroic sagas, but also the brutal, undeniable hand of nature shaping human destiny. Last time, we set the stage for a truly cataclysmic event, the 4.2-kilo-year aridification, a global drought so profound it etched itself into the very fabric of our planet's history. Today, we turn our gaze to one of the most magnificent civilizations the world has ever known, a civilization born from the life-giving waters of a single, sacred river, ancient Egypt. We're going to witness how this unparalleled force of nature, this relentless drying, tested the very foundations of the Old Kingdom, ultimately shattering its scepter and watching the Nile, its lifeblood, shrink to a mere trickle. Imagine, if you will, the majesty of the Old Kingdom. Picture the towering pyramids of Giza, monuments to the absolute power of pharaohs, who were not just rulers, but living gods. Visualize the bustling cities along the fertile banks of the Nile, where sophisticated irrigation systems brought forth abundant harvests, sustaining a vast population. This was a land of incredible order, prosperity, and unwavering faith, all orchestrated by centralized government whose authority radiated from the divine pharaoh. For centuries, this system had worked, an almost miraculous balance between human ingenuity and the benevolent rhythm of the Nile's annual inundation. Every year, without fail, the river would swell, spilling its rich, black silt onto the floodplains, renewing the land and guaranteeing the sustenance of its people. This predictable cycle was not just an agricultural necessity. It was the very bedrock of their cosmic understanding, a tangible manifestation of divine order. But what happens when that predictable rhythm falters? What happens when the life-giver, the sacred Nile itself, begins to betray its ancient promise? As the 4.2-kilo-year event tightened its grip around 2200 BC, Egypt, a land utterly dependent on the Nile's bounty, found itself on the precipice. The heart of this cataclysm for the Egyptians was a series of exceptionally low Nile floods. Year after year, the river failed to rise to its customary height. The inundation, once a guarantee of life, became a meager, insufficient trickle. Think about that for a moment. For a civilization built entirely upon this single natural phenomenon, a sustained failure of the Nile was not merely a bad harvest. It was an existential crisis. The immediate consequences were devastating. Crop yields plummeted. The fertile fields, once lush with wheat and barley, turned to cracked earth. Famine, a specter that had been largely kept at bay by Egypt's agricultural prowess, began to stalk the land. And not just a localized, temporary scarcity, but a widespread, prolonged hunger that gnawed at the very core of society. Now, in times of stability, the centralized government of the Old Kingdom, with its powerful pharaoh at the apex, possessed the administrative capacity to manage crises, to distribute resources, and to maintain order. But the sheer scale and persistence of this environmental disaster began to overwhelm even this sophisticated system. The pharaoh, traditionally seen as the intermediary between humanity and the gods, responsible for the prosperity of the land, found his divine authority severely challenged. If the gods were truly benevolent, why was the Nile abandoning its people? Why was the land starving? The cracks began to appear first in the periphery. As food became scarce, local administrators, the nomarchs who governed Egypt's various provinces, or nomes, found themselves increasingly unable to rely on the distant central authority for relief. Their focus shifted from serving the pharaoh to securing what little resources remained for their own people. This wasn't a malicious act, at least not initially. It was a desperate struggle for survival. But the cumulative effect was profound. The tightly woven tapestry of centralized power began to unravel. Historical records, though often fragmented in color by later interpretations, speak volumes about this period. Texts like the Admonitions of Epicure, though perhaps written centuries later, offer a chillingly vivid portrayal of a society in chaos. Indeed, the river is blood, yet men drink of it. Indeed, the poor of the land have become rich, and the possessor of property has become one who has nothing. Indeed, noble ladies are now like maidservants. Indeed, he who slept with his wife in his own house finds strangers lying with her. While these may be exaggerated literary devices, they paint a picture of utter social breakdown, of a world turned upside down. The pharaohs of the 6th dynasty, particularly after the long reign of Pepi II, struggled to maintain control. Pepi II, who ruled for an astonishingly long period, some estimates suggesting over 90 years, lived to see the first ominous signs of this decline. Upon his death, the already strained system began to fracture further. Succession disputes, a perennial problem in any monarchy, became magnified in this climate of scarcity and desperation. With the central government weakened and the pharaoh's divine legitimacy undermined by the failing Nile, the nomarchs effectively became independent warlords. They levied their own taxes, raised their own armies, and no longer answered to Memphis, the traditional capital. Imagine the grand administrative machinery of the Old Kingdom grinding to a halt. The intricate bureaucracy that managed irrigation, collected taxes, organized public works, and maintained granaries, all designed to channel resources to the top and then redistribute them, simply ceased to function effectively. Without consistent annual floods, the very basis of their agricultural economy collapsed. Food production became localized and precarious. Trade routes, once vital arteries connecting the various nomes and linking Egypt to the wider ancient world, became dangerous and unreliable. The collapse wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic explosion, but a gradual, agonizing fragmentation. It was a slow, suffocating death by drought. The Old Kingdom didn't vanish overnight. It withered away, piece by painful piece. Its magnificent unified state devolved into what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a tumultuous era characterized by decentralized power, localized conflicts, and a significant drop in artistic and architectural achievement. The resources and manpower that had once built pyramids and sustained a powerful court were now consumed by the daily struggle for survival. Even the afterlife, so central to Egyptian belief, was impacted. During the Old Kingdom, access to an elaborate burial and the promise of eternal life was largely reserved for the pharaoh and his elite. But as central authority weakened and nomarchs gained more power and wealth, they began to commission their own elaborate tombs and funerary provisions, mirroring the pharaohs, effectively democratizing the afterlife. This subtle shift is another indicator of the diffusion of power away from the single, omnipotent pharaoh. The legacy of the 4.2 kilo-year event on Egypt is profound. It wasn't just the end of a dynasty. It was the end of an entire era, a period of unparalleled stability and monumental achievement. It demonstrated, in the most brutal fashion, the fragility of even the most powerful civilizations when confronted with an unyielding natural force. The mighty Old Kingdom, built on the shifting sands of the desert and sustained by the predictable rhythm of a single river, ultimately succumbed to the river's betrayal. But this story, like all stories of profound challenge, also carries a message of resilience. Egypt, battered and fragmented, would eventually emerge from this period of chaos. It would rebuild, adapt, and rise again in new forms. Yet, The memory of the vanishing Nile and the shattered scepter of the Old Kingdom would serve as a stark reminder, etched into the collective consciousness, that even the gods could be fickle, and that humanity's greatest endeavors are always at the mercy of the Earth's powerful, indifferent breath. Next, we journey eastward, across the unforgiving deserts, to witness another superpower grappling with this same planetary affliction. We will see how the mighty Akkadian Empire, a true pioneer of imperial ambition, was brought to its knees by dust and desperation. Join me then, as we continue our descent into the profound and often terrifying story of the 4.2 kilo-year event. Now, let's turn our gaze eastward, to the vast plains and fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, and the fate of an empire that, for a time, seemed unconquerable, the Akkadian Empire. This was a realm that shattered the mold, the second civilization, after ancient Egypt, to weave together independent societies into a single formidable state. Around 2300 BC, Akkad was a superpower, a beacon of innovation, administration, and military might. But even the mightiest empires, as history often reminds us, are vulnerable to forces beyond their control. And for Akkad, that force was the unrelenting fist of nature itself. The story of Akkad's collapse is one etched in dust and desperation, a narrative deeply intertwined with the same climate cataclysm that gripped Egypt. Imagine, if you will, a world slowly suffocating under an unseen blanket of drought, a world where the very lifelines of civilization, the great rivers, began to falter. For Mesopotamia, those lifelines were the Tigris and Euphrates, rivers whose headwaters were fed by the generous winter rains of the Mediterranean. But as the 4.2 kilo-year event took hold, as the North Atlantic cooled and global ocean currents shifted, those crucial rains diminished. The evidence is stark, laid bare in the archaeological record. We see enhanced dust flux, coeval with isotopic peaks from around 4,260 to 3,970 years before present, a chilling testament to intense aridity blanketing Mesopotamia. This wasn't just a bad season. This was a prolonged, systemic drying out of the land. The very foundation of Akkadian prosperity, its agricultural heartland in northern Mesopotamia, began to wither. What followed was a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. The agricultural plains, once teeming with life and harvest, were abandoned. People, once rooted to their ancestral lands, were forced to flee, seeking any refuge, any source of sustenance they could find. Imagine the despair, the fear, as entire communities uprooted themselves, joining a tide of refugees flowing southward towards the perceived safety of southern Mesopotamia. Estimates suggest a staggering number of displaced individuals, perhaps as many as 300,000 according to some scholars, and certainly no less than 126,000. These were not mere numbers. These were families, individuals, their lives shattered, their futures uncertain. This massive influx of displaced people, desperate and hungry, placed immense strain on the resources of southern Mesopotamia. It disrupted the social fabric, created tensions, and fundamentally weakened the Akkadian state from within. To stem the tide of nomadic incursions, likely driven by their own desperate search for water and pasture, the Akkadians embarked on an ambitious, almost frantic project, the construction of a 180-kilometer-long wall, a repeller of the Amorites, across central Mesopotamia. It was a desperate measure, a physical manifestation of a civilization under siege, attempting to hold back the encroaching chaos. But physical walls, however formidable, cannot hold back the tide of environmental collapse. Around 2150 BC, as the empire reeled from the combined blows of drought, famine, and internal strife, another threat emerged from the Zagros Mountains, the Gudian people. Often depicted as a crude and barbaric force, the Gudians seized their opportunity. They swept down, confronting a demoralized Akkadian army, weakened and depleted by years of hardship. The capital city of Akkad itself, once the vibrant heart of an empire, was taken and utterly destroyed around 2115 BC. The fall of Akkad was not a swift, sudden event. It was a slow, agonizing descent into oblivion, exacerbated by the relentless grip of the 4.2-kilo-year event. The widespread agricultural changes visible across the Near East at the end of the 3rd millennium BC are a direct consequence of this climatic shift. Entire regions, once vibrant and productive, became marginal, struggling to sustain life. The impact wasn't confined to the immediate vicinity of Akkad. In the Persian Gulf region, we see a dramatic shift in settlement patterns, pottery styles, and even burial practices. The Amal-Nar culture, once prominent, vanished, replaced by the Wadi Suk culture. This wasn't merely a cultural evolution. It was a profound adaptation, a forced change in lifestyle brought about by necessity. Studies of fossil corals in Oman even point to prolonged winter shamal seasons around 2200 BC, leading to the salinization of irrigated fields. Imagine the bitterness of it all. The very water you bring to your crops, slowly poisoning the soil, diminishing your yields, triggering widespread famine. This, too, contributed to the widespread collapse, a complex tapestry of interconnected environmental and societal failures. It would take centuries for the northern plains of Mesopotamia to recover, for smaller sedentary populations to tentatively resettle the land, near 1900 BC. The collapse of Akkad serves as a chilling reminder, a testament to the fragility of even the most powerful human constructs when faced with a climate system pushed to its limits. It underscores how deeply intertwined human civilization is with the health of its environment, a lesson that echoes across millennia, whispering warnings to us even today. The dust that settled on Akkad, those many centuries ago, tells a story not just of an empire's end, but of a world irrevocably altered by a single, catastrophic climate event. And so, as the dust settled over Mesopotamia, and the echoes of Akkad's once mighty empire faded into the parched earth, the narrative of the 4.2-kilo-year event stretches further east, like a phantom wave across a desiccated landscape. For this was no isolated incident, no localized catastrophe. The same unforgiving hand that gripped the Nile and the twin rivers now reached for the mighty Indus, and for the burgeoning cultures along the Yellow and Yangtze. Imagine, if you will, the bustling cities of the Indus Valley civilization. Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Ganarawala. These were urban marvels, meticulously planned, with sophisticated drainage systems, monumental granaries, and a vibrant trade network that stretched across continents. Their people were master craftsmen. Their script remains a tantalizing mystery, and their way of life, sustained by the lifeblood of the monsoon-fed rivers, was a testament to human ingenuity. But then, the rain clouds began to fail, not just for a season or a year, but for decades, perhaps even centuries. The Indian summer monsoon, that colossal engine of life-giving water, faltered. Its majestic sweep across the subcontinent diminished, its once reliable downpours becoming increasingly erratic, weaker, and less extensive. The Ghaggar-Hakra river system, which nourished vast swathes of this civilization, was utterly dependent on these monsoons. As the rains dwindled, so too did the rivers. Their mighty channels, once arteries of commerce and irrigation, began to shrink, their flow receding towards the distant Himalayan foothills. Picture the scene. Fields that once yielded bountiful harvests of wheat and barley now cracked under the relentless sun. Wells, once overflowing, became mere puddles, then dry pits. The intricate systems of inundation agriculture, perfected over generations, became unsustainable. The very foundation of their urban existence, a stable, predictable water supply, began to crumble. Archaeological evidence paints a stark picture of this decline. Urban centers, once thrumming with life, show signs of abandonment. The intricate street patterns grow silent, the workshops still. We see a shift, a scattering of populations eastward, a desperate migration in search of reliable water sources, a pursuit of their vanishing habitat. The cohesive urban fabric of the Indus Valley civilization began to fray, replaced by more disparate, localized cultures. It was not a sudden, cataclysmic collapse, but a drawn-out, agonizing process, a slow suffocation of a once flourishing way of life. Now, some scholars might argue, and quite rightly, that the collapse of the Indus Valley civilization was multifaceted. Perhaps a decline in trade with the distant civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia also played a role. But the overwhelming consensus points to the climate, to this pervasive aridification as the primary antagonist. The withdrawal of the monsoon, the shrinking rivers, the relentless drought. These were the forces that rendered their intricate urban life untenable. It was a stark reminder of humanity's enduring vulnerability to the planet's grand, indifferent cycles. And as we journey further east, across the vast expanses of Asia, we find the chilling fingerprints of the 4.2-kilo-year event reaching even into the nascent civilizations of ancient China. Here, the East Asian summer monsoon, a parallel powerhouse of precipitation, also experienced a profound weakening. Imagine the consequences: a dramatic reduction in rainfall, a stark humidity gradient emerging between the parched northern regions and the relatively less affected south. In northeastern China, proxy records from ancient lakes tell a tale of intense drought, of a sharp decline in the evergreen broadleaf forests that once thrived there. The lifeblood of these early Neolithic cultures, the steady flow of water that irrigated their burgeoning agricultural practices, was compromised. We see evidence of declining populations, of fewer archaeological sites, of cultures struggling to sustain themselves in the face of dwindling resources. Consider the flourishing Longshan culture in the Ishu River Basin. This was a sophisticated society, known for its exquisite black pottery and advanced agricultural techniques. But analysis of archaeological sites reveals a period of cooling, a severe reduction in rice output, and a substantial decrease in population. Around 2000 BC, the Longshan culture gives way to the Yueshur culture, characterized by fewer and less sophisticated artifacts. It's a subtle but significant shift, a testament to the strain placed upon a society by a changing climate. Further south, along the lower reaches of the Yangtze River, the enigmatic Liangzhu civilization also shows signs of decline during this same period. This culture, famous for its magnificent jade artifacts and impressive water management systems, appears to have been another casualty of the widespread climatic perturbation. The Dankou culture, too, is believed to have been pushed towards its end by the unrelenting drought. However, the picture in China, like in other regions, is not uniformly grim. The Longshan culture of the Luoyang Basin, for instance, appears to have weathered the storm with greater resilience, continuing to develop and thrive. This serves as a vital reminder that the effects of the 4.2-kilo-year event were spatially complex, its intensity varying across different regions, influenced by localized geography and the adaptive strategies of the people who inhabited them. Yet, the overarching narrative remains clear. This was a period of immense global disruption. From the Fertile Crescent to the banks of the Indus, from the deltas of the Nile to the river valleys of ancient China, the sky held its breath, and the world was utterly transformed. Rivers ran dry, fields turned to dust, and the very foundations of thriving civilizations were shaken to their core. In our next segment, we will delve deeper into the scientific debate surrounding the 4.2-kilo-year event, exploring the evidence that has allowed us to reconstruct this ancient climatic cataclysm and the fascinating, sometimes contentious, arguments that shape our understanding of its true global reach. For even today, this ancient drought holds lessons for us, echoes of a past that warns us about the delicate balance between humanity and the natural world. Stay with me as we continue to unearth the long, silent history of the ancient world. And so, our journey through the crucible of the 4.2-kilo-year event concludes for tonight. It's a sobering reminder of how intimately human civilization has always been tied to the delicate balance of our planet. The echoes of these ancient collapses still resonate, urging us to understand the profound power of climate. I hope this deep dive has offered you new perspectives, perhaps even something to ponder. What are your thoughts on this narration? And what other ancient mysteries or untold stories would you like us to explore in future videos? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this journey, remember to like, share it with a friend, and follow Vibing History for more immersive explorations into the past. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.